Every Christmas Eve, all across the U.S., children leave a plate of cookies and a glass of cold milk out for Santa to snack on while he makes his holiday rounds. But when and why did that tradition actually start? Let's find out on today's episode of
Colossal Questions.
Leaving milk and cookies for Santa Claus is a holiday tradition that first took off in popularity stateside back in the 1930s. During this time, the US and the rest of the world was going through the Great Depression, which left many families with little to no money. But poor parents all around the country wanted to find a way to teach their children the importance of giving to others, even when you had barely anything to give. So, leaving milk and cookies for Santa was a way for kids to say thanks for the gifts that Jolly St. Nick was about to leave them. Nowadays, many families still follow the same tradition, even though most of us don't know why. It's just a fun thing to do on Christmas Eve. But while the tradition might have first become popular in the US in the 1930s, this holiday tradition is actually much older and goes all the way back to the Norse mythology of the Vikings. You see, in Norse mythology, the god Odin rode an 8-legged horse called Sleipnir. During the Yuletide festival in late December, kids would leave food like carrots and hay outside for Sleipnir to eat, hoping he would leave them gifts in return. Some countries even still do it to this day. Kids in Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands today believe Santa's sleigh is carried by horses rather than reindeer, and they still leave food outside on Christmas Eve. So, who invented the milk and cookies for Santa tradition? Who knows? Like most other age-old traditions, this one evolved over time. So, pour that cold glass of milk, leave out those delicious cookies, and don't forget about those poor reindeer too. Each December, as the holiday season swings into full gear, people across the country reach into the back of their closets and rummage around for their iconic piece of holiday fashion, the ugly Christmas sweater. But where did this strange seasonal tradition start? Let's find out on today's episode of
Colossal Questions.
The intentionally ugly Christmas sweaters we wear today can trace their origins back to the original mass-produced Jingle Bell sweaters of the 1950s. But the ugly Christmas sweater faded into relative obscurity for 30 years or so, until the 1980s, when they first started to become really fashionable. For several years, these ornate, colorful Jingle Bell sweaters remained popular, even showing up in classic Christmas movies from the 80s. As the 90s rolled around, these silly, stuffy sweaters mostly went out of fashion, but in the early 2000s, they came back more popular than ever. No one can say for certain what reignited our fascination with the ugly Christmas sweater, but some sources trace the trend to another country, which might have had the first ever ugly Christmas sweater party in Vancouver, Canada in 2002. Little did they know that their minor tongue-in-cheek event would evolve into such a cultural phenomenon. Over the years, the holiday trend has only gotten more popular, more ironic, and the sweaters have gotten crazier and crazier. Even high-end fashion brands are in on the trend, slapping giant price tags on intentionally ugly Christmas sweaters of their own. So, who actually invented the ugly Christmas sweater? Who's to say? Like so many other inventions, no one person masterminded it on their own. Instead, it's just a small, strange trend that took on a life of its own, slowly becoming a full-on modern Christmas trend. So, this year, find yourself the ugliest, stuffiest sweater you can find, probably in the back of your grandparents' closet, and enjoy one of the holiday season's truly strange traditions. Every holiday season, stores stock their shelves with a special peppermint treat, the candy cane. But who actually invented the candy cane, and why the shape? Let's find out on today's episode of
Colossal Questions.
The truth is, no one knows for sure who actually invented candy canes, but there is a common legend about their origin that may or may not be true. The folktale goes like this. In the 1600s, a German choir master at a cathedral in Cologne gave his choir boys candy sticks to keep them quiet during a special Christmas ceremony in the church. Fearing that some might see the candy treats as too fun for a holiday ceremony, the choir master supposedly hatched a plan. Given the season, he decided to bend his candy gifts into the shape of a shepherd's staff called a crook and told everyone they were a part of the ceremony. So, did a choir master in the 1600s really invent candy canes on the fly? Well, no one can say for sure, but probably not. There are a few things about candy canes we can say for certain though. For instance, before the 1900s, candy canes were completely white. That's right, the iconic red stripes we associate with candy canes today were actually added in later once they could be made in factories. Besides adding red stripes, the other defining moment in candy cane history came with the invention of a special machine that can curl them into their classic shape. Before the machine, about a quarter of all candy canes would actually break because you had to bend them into their shape by hand. But the machines could bend them and spit them out perfect just about every time. This opened the door for candy canes to finally be mass-produced, and ever since, they've been one of the most popular candies during the holiday months. So, who invented candy canes? It's likely we'll never know, but we can thank those who perfected them along the way. Every Christmas, lucky kids all across the world wake up to a big batch of Christmas gifts. But why? Why do people give gifts on Christmas, and when did it start? Let's find out on today's episode of
Colossal Questions.
People have been giving each other gifts as long as we've had gifts to give. But in order to track the origins of Christmas gifts specifically, we have to head back to ancient Rome. You see, the Romans had a holiday called Saturnalia that took place each December. They would celebrate with carnivals, parties, feasts, and small gifts. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, gift-giving around the winter holidays morphed into a Christmas custom too. Stories like the Three Wise Men and St. Nicholas slowly helped cement gift-giving as a regular part of the Christmas holiday. But there was one big snag along the way in the 1600s, when people in what would eventually be the United States outlawed Christmas for 22 years. Yup, you heard that right. All Christmas activities, including dancing, plays, games, Christmas carols, cheerful celebration, and gifts, were banned by the English government in 1644. And 15 years later, Boston and New England did the same. You see, some people in power felt that Christmas actually wasn't religious enough and focused too much on food, drinks, loud music, and rowdy partying in the streets. Luckily, it didn't last, and by the 1800s, Christmas, and yes, Christmas gifts, were back for good. So this Christmas morning, if you don't open exactly the gift you wanted, just remember, it could be a lot worse. Winter fun. Sledding, snow forts, snowball fights, snow angels, and most important of all, big fluffy snowflakes. You've probably heard that every single snowflake is unique, but could that actually be true? Is every snowflake really unique? Let's find out on today's episode of
Colossal Questions.
Lots of people say that every single snowflake has its own unique pattern, but that's not actually exactly true. It's just that the chances of finding two identical twin snowflakes is very, very, very rare. Your chances are about 1 in 1 million trillion. That's a 1 followed by 18 zeros. Just how probable is that? Well, you have a better chance of winning the lottery twice or getting struck by lightning 3 times than you do of finding 2 identical snowflakes. Okay, so now we know that 2 snowflakes can be the same, it's just really unlikely, but why do snowflakes take on so many unique patterns in the first place? Well, a single snowflake is made up of 3 basic things: ice crystals, water, and dust floating around in the air. Snowflakes form inside very cold clouds when water vapor freezes onto dust particles, creating ice crystals. More drops of water freeze onto dust particles, making an even bigger collection of ice crystals that all clump together, creating a snowflake. As the water in a snowflake freezes, the molecules line up into a hexagon pattern, which is why all snowflakes have 6 sides. The temperature of the clouds will affect the shape of the snowflake, and the amount of moisture in them will affect the size. The more moisture, the bigger the snowflakes. Once snowflakes start falling, they don't just take a straight path to the ground, they swish, swirl, and corkscrew through the air, swept all around by the wind and elements, which continues to shape a snowflake's pattern. That means that 2 snowflakes that were formed in the exact same cloud will take 2 different paths to the ground, which affects their shape, size, and gives each of them a unique pattern. So is every snowflake unique? No, but you're also never likely to find 2 snowflakes that look alike, so maybe wait for spring and stick to 4-leaf clovers. Every year, people all across the globe celebrate the Christmas season with all sorts of lights and decorations. But no holiday decoration is more iconic than the Christmas tree. But have you ever wondered, why do we decorate trees to celebrate Christmas? Let's find out on today's episode of
Colossal Questions.
Most historians agree that the very first Christmas tree was decorated over 1,300 years ago in modern-day Germany. As the old story goes, an English missionary named Saint Boniface traveled to Germany in the 700s. While in Germany, he came across a group of Norse pagans who were preparing to make a sacrifice to a sacred oak tree. Boniface stopped the sacrifice by cutting down the oak tree with one swing of an axe. And according to the legend, a fir tree sprang up in the spot where the oak tree had been standing. Now, that story is just an old legend. Saint Boniface never really cut down a tree, and a fir tree never really sprung up instantly in its place. But what is true is that the Christmas tree is a melding of pagan and Christian traditions. Okay, so that's where the Christmas tree comes from, but how did it go from a story about a fir tree to lights and ornaments in our living room? Well, it started to take shape during the Middle Ages, when churches began decorating living fir trees with apples on Christmas Eve. They didn't call them Christmas trees yet, though. Back then, they were known as paradise trees. By the mid-1500s, people started adding lit candles to the fir trees to go with the apples. Slowly but surely, the Christmas tree as we know it today was starting to take shape. It wasn't until 1841 that Christmas trees became widely known outside of Germany. That's because Queen Victoria of England married a German prince named Albert. That winter, he began the custom of decorating a large Christmas tree at the Queen's castle. In those days, Queen Victoria wasn't just a queen, she was also a fashion icon. So everything she did became fashionable. So after a print was published of the Queen and her family in front of their decorated fir tree, Christmas trees became all the rage across the Western world. In the United States, Christmas trees were mostly just decorated by German immigrants who came to the US and lived in places like Pennsylvania. It wasn't until the invention of the electric light that Christmas trees really took off in America. People across the country loved it, and just like that, the modern Christmas tree was born. Father Christmas, Kris Kringle, Jolly Saint Nick, or simply Santa Claus. No matter what you call him, you know about the jolly guy leaving gifts for kids all across the world. But why so many different names? Where did Santa Claus get his name? Let's find out on today's episode of
Colossal Questions.
Just about everyone knows that Christmas is held on December 25th every year, but there's another holiday in December dedicated to Jolly Saint Nick. That's right, it's called St. Nicholas Day, or the Feast of St. Nicholas, and it's held every single year on December 6th. It's a popular celebration all across Europe, and even in parts of the US with strong German, Polish, or Dutch roots like Milwaukee, Cincinnati, St. Louis, and Pittsburgh. The holiday celebrates the memory of a man named St. Nicholas, who was born about 800 years ago. He was well known for his generous miracles and loved to give people surprise gifts by putting coins in their shoes while they sleep. Over the next few hundred years, an annual day in December of feasting and celebrating in his honor began. Today, keeping with St. Nick's age-old tradition, kids still leave their shoes outside their rooms on the night of December 5th, hoping to collect coins, candies, and small gifts. So, does that mean St. Nicholas from 800 years ago is the same jolly St. Nick who lives in the North Pole? Nope. But since we celebrate St. Nicholas in December, and he also liked to give gifts, people have long associated Santa Claus with St. Nicholas. So much so that we even call Santa Jolly St. Nick for fun. But that's not his only nickname. Father Christmas is the Old English name for Santa, and Kris Kringle comes from Christkinkle, his Old German name used by Pennsylvania Dutch settlers in the United States. But no matter what name you call him, he's still the same Santa Claus flying his sled through the skies, bringing a bit of holly jolly holiday joy.